Very satisfying. Good afternoon, members. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this meeting of South Hams District Council Licensing Committee. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I'll ask Ms Young.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillors Kemp and Panel.
Great. So Councillor Panel, though he's given his apologies, is joining us via streaming method. So he can't vote, but he is sort of semi-present, I suppose. Item 2 is minutes of the last meeting. Now, there's a few to go through, but my intention, so long as we legally can do it, is to take them on block. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 sets of minutes going from January 21 to August 21. Are we happy to take those on block? Happy? Okay, all those in favour, please. Thank you. Right. Yeah, lovely. Sorry. Yes, I should ask. So I shall ask the top table and indeed Tara to introduce themselves, if I may.
I'm David Fairbairn, Head of Legal Services Monitoring Officer and Legal Advisor to the committee this afternoon.
Lee Staples, Contract Licensing Officer, here to present the report on the taxi fares amendment this afternoon.
Janice Young, Democratic Services Officer and Clerk to this committee.
And Tara O'Keefe, Licensing Specialist.
Thank you, and I'm Dan Brown. I'm Chairman of Licensing at South Hams.
And I'm Rosemary Rowan. I'm Vice Chairman of the Licensing Committee at South Hams.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so that's items 1 and 2 done. Item 3 is division of the agenda. I'm not aware of any reasons that we will have to divide the agenda this afternoon. Item 4 is declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Any interest to declare? None? Okay, thank you. Item number 5 is the proposed amendment to the South Hams Hackney Carriage fare tariff, which is from pages 27 onwards in your agenda pack. So I shall hand over to Mr Staples for him to present his report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd start by just giving a very brief explanation about taxi fares, and in particular how taxi meters work, because unless you're a licensing officer like myself and Tara, or a taxi driver, you probably haven't had much kind of input in these apart from looking at it, clicking over as you're travelling along. So with a taxi meter, the way that it's set up, certainly in South Hams and in the most part across the rest of the country, the meter itself works on 2 parameters. It works on both distance, which you can see on the current tariff you have, and also on waiting time. Now, the waiting time, just for clarification, is when the vehicle stops once the journey has started. So normally, in fact, what should happen with the meter is it's not turned on to start charging until everybody's in the car, seatbelts on, ready to go. And at that point, when you stop at the traffic lights and so on like that, the meter will put on money for the waiting time as well as the distance that you've travelled. So that's just, I think, helpful when you start looking at the different options you have in front of you later on in the report. The meters themselves can have distance calculation checked. So what licensing officers can do, we'll go along and we'll measure them with measure a distance with a trundle wheel, and then we'll look at the meter turning over so we can check that. And the meters themselves have a programmable chip. So effectively what they can do is connect it to a computer, and the tariff can then be uploaded onto the meter. So the meter knows the date, it knows the time of day, and it would automatically apply the different tariffs. It's how they're programmed to work in that. And they also include an extras button as well. So you'll notice that on the trade proposals in particular, and indeed existing, there are a number of potential extra charges, and those can be applied by pressing the button repeatedly on the meter to apply in 10p increments normally with these sorts of things. So that's just a little background on the meters. They're only the way this works is we're talking about Hackney carriages here rather than private hire vehicles. Private hire vehicles may have meters as well, but the law, and in particular, the law around the maximum fare charge, which is what this is applying to, is relating to Hackney carriages. So the price on that meter, the tariff that we set here, is the maximum amount a driver will be able to charge for an in-district fare. They can charge less if they wish to. There can be a negotiation with customers. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but they may not charge more than that. So that's just a bit of a background with that for clarification purposes.
Councillor Smurden.
Could you use the microphone, please?
Why are they still calculating yards? Why are you calculating everything in yards?
There's a parallel calculation in meters. It's the way it's Hackney carriage legislation is exceptionally old-fashioned. We go back to the Town Police Clauses Act 1847, and essentially, I think this is everything to do with this is quite antiquated. Essentially, so what we have got yards. We have got it in meters as well. I don't know the exact answer as to why they do it in yards, but if you look across the country, it's always done like that. I don't know whether it's something to do with the programming with that. I suspect not. I suspect it's just a historical thing.
Councillor Thomas.
I don't think the public who are listening will be devastated by the loss of that. Councillor Panel, I'll phone you and tell you the question later. It was ever so exciting.
Any other questions from members at this point before the officer proceeds to their full report? No? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. You said Hackney carriages were limited on their charges, but not necessarily private hire. So is that as it runs? And we got no jurisdiction over the private hires, even if they got a meter in.
No, that's correct. Essentially, what happens with private hire is that is a private contract between the customer and the driver, or the private hire operator in that instance. And it's for the operator and for the customer to negotiate the price of the journey, basically. It's why many private hire operators will give you a fixed price for if you're going a longer distance. But no, we're only permitted to control the fares of Hackney carriages, not private hire vehicles.
Lovely. Anything further to add at this point?
No, happy to proceed to the main part of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So looking at proposed amendment for taxi fares here, and just to run through the recommendations, it's recommended that the committee A, consider whether to modify the current table of maximum fares or make no modification to the current table of maximum fares. And that in the event that the modification of the table of maximum fares is considered acceptable, we indicate the preferred option from those set out below. Also that the committee approves that in the event that the current table of fares is modified, the date upon which the modification of the maximum fare shall take effect shall be 1 month after the end of the 14-day statutory consultation period, if no representations are received. And also that to approve the departure in this instance from the previously adopted maximum chargeable fare setting policy from 2016 on the basis that not all of the information required by that policy for the calculation of the maximum fare is currently readily available, and to instead use the Consumer Price Index. So the fares here were last reviewed in 2016 and they came into effect in early 2017. And because of the significant price rises in both fuel prices and the cost of living recently, it would appear to be a good time to review fares. Tara and myself have had correspondence from the taxi trade requesting a review of fares, and we worked up a number of options that are concluded in this report, we also received a detailed option from the trade themselves, where they've given quite a lot of consideration to the fare schemes, and have come back to us. There's been an approximate 12.1% increase in the Consumer Price Index since 2016, and on that basis, we can argue that there's the fares significantly lower than would be appropriate. The National Private Hire and Taxi Monthly magazine produces a table of fares nationally for all of the different local authority Hackney carriage tariffs each month, and currently South Hams are 192nd out of 358 local authorities for a 2-mile journey, and they are the second lowest in Devon, as well as being quite a good bit below the national 2-mile average fare. Due to the rural nature of South Hams, there's going to be more dead mileage, and therefore you would expect the fares to be a wee bit higher than that as well. We have 4 potential options for the amendment of the fare tables. We have a 4.9% rise across the fare table, and that's based on the most recent CPI inflation figure. So that was from the February CPI figure. Option 2 would be a 12.1% rise across the fare table. That's based on the current inflation figure, plus the estimated inflation figure rises since January 2018, which would be 7.2%. Then we have a third option here, which is a 6.7% rise across the fare table, and that is based on the current CPI inflation figure of 4.9%, plus the average CPI inflation figure since January 2018. And we have a fourth option, which has been proposed by Totnes Taxis Limited. Tara and myself received that on the 18th of March, and that proposes a 21% rise on Tariff 1 for the first 880 yards. A subsequent distance charge has been reduced from 170 yards to 140 yards. It remains at 20p, but for that 140 yards as opposed to 170. And they've also applied an increase of 10% to Tariff 2 for the first 880 yards and a percentage increase of 15% to Tariff 3. The final option is to make no change at all to the fare table. Back in 2016, the committee approved a fare setting policy, and it achieved, good fairness and transparency, which is what you want of that sort of policy. But one of the key components of that policy, the AA estimated vehicle standing charges, isn't any longer being published by the AA. They do give a very prescriptive way of working it out, but what we would have to do is try and work out an average for a taxi in South Ham. So we need to look at quite a few, and that would be really quite time consuming. And this is why we've moved to this CPI-based figure for this particular, for several of the options. We recognise the need to look at these fares, and we wanted to get a report in front of you in a good amount of time rather than waiting, basically. And using the previous fare setting one would have taken quite a lot of time from officers in particular. And we feel that using the CPI inflation figures, that gives a pretty fair and transparent way of applying this. And also that builds upon the work that had been done in 2016, which clearly set out a good rationale for setting the fares as well. In addition to the amendment to the maximum table of maximum fares, the options that Tara and myself worked up included an exceptional fuel price figure to be included on the list of applicable extra charges. What it's proposing here is that 10p be added to the fare price when the fuel oil price exceeds £1.75. Based on the most recent AA fuel price report, the AA have published the fuel price reports for many, many years. I was just looking online this morning, you can go back to sort of January 2017. And looking at that, there's been an approximate 30% rise since the January 2017, looking at those figures on fuel prices compared to what they are currently today. The idea with this, and it's been implemented by a number of Devon authorities, is that it's something that the drivers can use readily, and it would hopefully future-proof the taxi tariffs, because it is quite a lot of work to put these together for a little bit of time, whilst there's still that volatility in the fuel price market. The proposed way forward here is that the committee indicates its preference for one of the options for the fare amendment, and approves a 14-day statutory consultation period on the preferred fare option, and that if there's no adverse comment or objections, then the changes come into effect a month later. Alternatively, if we do get adverse comments, then it would be returned to committee for the committee to consider those comments. That concludes the report that I've summarised there, and I'm happy to take any questions on the contents or the appendices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question from Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very brief question, but how many of the taxis, if any, are electric?
One from Miss O'Keefe, I suspect.
Good question. I can get a more accurate figure if you want, but we don't actually have many electric vehicles. I think we've got more hybrid vehicles, to be honest, but I can run a quick report on the system and get some proper figures for you if you want.
Thank you. That would be interesting because, I mean, obviously, you know, what we're looking at here is, you know, being very concerned about what's going on with petrol prices.
Too far away from the microphone, Chair.
Oh, am I too far away? But I'm just thinking that, you know, this possibly gives us a mechanism to, you know, actively encourage people to move towards electric. So I think we should bear it in mind that they shouldn't basically be out of pocket if they're electric, because obviously there's quite a high investment in changing vehicle. So I'm just putting that in the mix, really. Thank you.
Right. Okay, certainly noted. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Just a quick one on that. The 12% that's in one of these options, right, is on a top rate of fiver is 60p, obviously. I'm not a mathematician, but that's a fairly easy one. Is the maximum amount? Does that 12% go straight back to where the original agreement is? I mean, because you said they could negotiate a lower price if they can. So that 12% would be on top of that lower price as well, yeah? But 60 pence doesn't seem very much, to be honest. But I mean, if you're travelling regularly on a taxi, it is. But it's cheaper than running your own car.
Absolutely, no. Like I said, the 12% there runs across the tariff. It would add up when you look at a fair distance travel, particularly in this area. It's fairly rural where people are getting a taxi for a little bit further than the average person would in the country. That would add up across that period, and I just relate that to the national figures. So you're looking at quite a significant jump up in where the South Hams taxi fares would sit in the national kind of league table of taxi fares. So just to highlight that. The 12% here would bring you out at you jump to 23rd place nationally, basically, with that. So for £7.16 at 2 miles, basically, that we've calculated here. 42nd, I beg your pardon. So, it is a fair jump with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that? Councillor Holway?
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, it obviously depends on when different authorities put their prices up, doesn't it? So that could be a bit misleading. Yeah. No. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a number of most of the Devon authorities are looking at their current fares at the moment. You'll notice that there's a couple of outliers. At the moment, we have We have Torridge, which are really quite high up in the national tables, and you have Mid Devon, which are very, very low. Southampton at the moment are pretty middle ground basically at the moment, and all of the kind of proposed options are within that framework. But I know that Torbay are currently going out. Plymouth have recently gone out and changed their fares, and they've also implemented this 10p fuel accumulator for the exceptional fuel prices as well. I'm aware that Teambridge also have that as well. So you're looking at similar mechanisms being considered across Devon, I would say, at the moment. North Devon have a report due as well currently at the moment. So what we have here figure-wise is going to be subject to some significant degree of change over the next month or two, I would say.
Okay, so Councillor Thomas first, then Councillor Smurden.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if officers could, on options 1, 2 and 3, we've got a basic percentage rise based on CPI, which is understandable. The trade proposal, I've had a look at the paperwork. Do you know what the justifications are around cost 1 and the incremental increases? You know, because they're obviously not directly tied in to any set. I don't know if they could, if officers do know, that would be great, Chairman.
Who would like to take that one?
No, I like I said, I'm not aware of that. Thank you, Councillor. It's something that there is a number of discussions with the trade about a potential increase, and then rather late in the time that when we were writing this report, we got these options free. So I don't know the background to that. As I say, the other element to this is that they've looked to change the distance involved in when the meter's clicking over. So you have the initial charge that applies, and then you would have the reduction from 170 yards to 140 yards basically subsequently for when the meter is clicking over, and that will make a difference. I don't know what the rationale is with that, but you know, they've obviously put a fair amount of thought into this.
If I could come back, Chairman, the reason I ask is because committee members will note in the letter in Appendix 4 that the signatory of the letter says that should the committee feel any of these changes are not acceptable, there'll be a general discussion with the drivers, or alternatively a meeting with drivers' representatives to discuss the problem area more fully. And that was my concern, that the drivers appear to be aware of a problem area and have put this price rationale in place, but I'm not sure if we are aware of what the problem as such is.
Okay, I suspect we can take that up, can't we? Mr. Lusk, I'll just get clarity on this question then. There's a few other members that I know that wish to ask questions or comment on this, but I don't know if Mr. Luscombe, hopefully he heard the comments that were just made by Councillor Thomas, whether or not he could offer his thoughts. Mr. Luscombe joins us via Teams.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I can't offer any clarity. I'm not on mute. Can you hear me better now?
Still can't hear you at the moment.
I'm talking, but you can't hear me.
Aha, I think we can hear you now. Lovely, thank you.
Right. Okay. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. I can't offer any clarity, I'm afraid, on the comments which were in the letter. As Mr. Staples said, it was received quite late in the day. Officers will be able to advise whether, I think, the taxis people representatives could have come to the meeting to explain that, but I don't believe that they're anywhere here in the meeting today. Also, does the consultation period that we're advocating, the 14 days, give opportunity for reply? So if members were minded to choose one of the options today, it would go to a consultation period, and then acceptance of that would be based on any consultation response. Don't know whether Mr. Staples could clarify that.
Staples.
Thank you.
Yes, any adverse comments against the proposed changes would be picked up and would be brought back to committee so we could explore those comments in full. If no negative comments were received, then the proposed fares would come into effect a month later.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for your response, Mr. Lusker. Are you content with that response, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I just would probably make the point in fairness that the 18th of March was 2 weeks ago tomorrow, Chairman. in terms of conversations about late in the day.
I
I just think for the record, that's important to note.
Councillor Hawkins is asking to come in here as executive member for the portfolio.
Could I suggest, did the Totnes taxi group realise they could actually address this committee? They probably didn't. They did. Could I suggest perhaps you actually recommend an increase at this meeting, and then as is a 14-day consultation period, they could then be invited to come to the next committee with their concerns and issues? Would that not be a way forward?
Okay, right. Thank you. Councillor Smurden.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a bit of clarity on this 10p per litre surcharge when fuel oil is above 175. Okay, so you got fuel oil, but I mean we all know you've got some cars run on diesel, which you would say was fuel oil, but I mean if they're running a petrol, if diesel's at 175, then petrol is going to be, the chances are petrol will be 165, which is below this. Are you going to tell me that somebody who's running a petrol taxi won't be charging the 10p? And when the price of diesel, I mean, it may go up, it may go down, but I mean, there were issues in the budget or measures in the budget which were supposed to help the price of fuel. It may take 6 months, it might take a year, but if the price of fuel does go below this level, what mechanisms in place to make sure that that drivers are not still charging the 10p?
Okay, is that one for Staples? Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. No, very good question. This is, to some extent, the danger of applying extras to a tariff table. So the extras are at the discretion of the driver. They're applied by pressing a button on the meter to apply the extra charge at the end of the journey. The way we would control that, and the way it's done, across the country generally, is by undertaking mystery shopping visits, basically with vehicles, and the drivers know that happens. So effectively, either a private company or licensing officers acting as customers would mystery shop the vehicle, and that would be a mechanism that we can look at from a regulatory capacity, basically, as to whether that's being abused or not. That's the downside with that, is it's something that it takes a lot of resource. It's not something that can be done every month. It would typically be something that might be done once, maybe even twice a year. But that's a point-in-time survey, and there are obviously limitations with that. Most drivers are entirely scrupulous with that, looking at previous mystery shopping work that I've been involved with. But there would always be, in any industry, a small minority of individuals that will look to kind of do things in an unscrupulous manner. So yeah, it is a risk involved in doing that. Yeah, in terms of fuel oil prices, like I said, the idea with this is if you're a diesel vehicle and the price is 175 for diesel at that time, you would apply it. If you're a petrol vehicle and it's not, then you wouldn't apply it. That's the principle here. But it is down to the individual driver actually being scrupulous in undertaking that.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick supplementary. What do we use, as a base figure? I mean, we're talking 175, but I mean, is that a national average figure or a Totnes area average figure?
Thank you very much for that question. I'm happy to clarify. So this would be the national average based on the AA fuel price report, which is published monthly.
Okay, fair enough.
Some councils have used a local garage as a reference garage. My recommendation would be to use the AA report to look at it on a national picture, because I believe that would give a greater, gives greater transparency. Any member of the public can check that to verify that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Panel, Councillor Foss, then Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, some of the points have been addressed since I've been waiting to speak. That's fine. I do feel that an increase of 21%, I think, which is what the traders' proposal amounts to, is rather steep. I do feel that a 12.1%, which covers inflation since the fees were last set, is a fair figure. And if the traders have concerns, as Mr. Luscombe said, they can come back and voice those in their comments when this is published. And I agree that although this would lift us to 42nd nationally, that a lot of other councils will probably be reviewing their figures at the moment, and that we will probably drop down to somewhere near in the middle. So I would be in favour of the 12.1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Panel. Councillor Foss?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Is it working?
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Yeah, there was a question asked, Councillor asked just now about how many are hybrid taxis. If you've got our electric, have you any hybrid ones? Because that makes a vast difference. Having changed from old petrol to hybrid, the amount of petrol I've saved is quite a large amount. And that would that have any effect on what we're doing?
So from what I can see, we have one private hire vehicle, which is a fully electric vehicle, but we don't have any Hackney carriages that are fully electric. We have about 4 or 5 hybrid vehicles for Hackney carriage at the moment, but it is becoming more popular. It's something that is being encouraged across the trade nationally. So that figure will probably go up at some point. But at the moment, I think it's just the cost of the vehicle is quite expensive to get. So a lot of ours are actually diesel vehicles at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there are 2 points we need to consider here. The first one is the ability of people to pay for a taxi, how much they're prepared to pay, because there are people around towns and indeed in the villages who want to get into town who do not own a car, maybe are not serviced by a very good bus service, if indeed a bus service at all in some of our outlying areas, who need to come into our towns, and how much they are able to pay given that the cost of living is forever rising. I think we need to consider that, and also we need to consider the firms, the people who run the taxis, and the fact that running a car or a taxi or whatever, fuel's gone up considerably. The last time we viewed it was in 2016, when I guess that diesel and petrol was probably about £1.10, £1.15 per litre. I'm not sure of the prices, but I don't think the prices then are in the report. But I would be considering all those options, and I would go with option 2, which is a 12.1% increase. I'd like to move that we adopt that increase, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Rowe has proposed that.
I'll second that.
Okay, all right. Any other comments members wish to make at the moment? Councillor Hodgson?
I'm actually in support of what Councillor Rose proposed and has been seconded. And I just wanted to add really that it's not just about fuel prices that are increasing. I don't know about other people, but my insurance has increased this year. And, you know, I'm sure that they are reflected in what the taxi drivers having to pay as well. So it is, as you say, a fine balance, because we want to make sure that they get plenty of customers, you know, and as well that the customers get well served. But I think that seems fairly fair to me.
Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Chair, while I'm in support of what's been said, I'm going to risk boring the committee again by referring back to the letter from Totnes Taxi Company, because I think the very last line is relevant to what we're talking about now, which says that in order to avoid such a jump in prices in future, the general feeling amongst the drivers is that therefore to be a rate review more frequently, we would suggest annually or biannually. And I just think we ought to throw that into the mix, that we are talking about a 12.1% rise because we haven't considered this for 6 years. And I think that is terribly relevant. But otherwise, I support wholeheartedly the proposal from Councillor Rowe.
Okay, Councillor Holwood, you wish to speak?
Sorry,
right.
not nodding in.
All right, thank you. So there is a proposer. There's 2 votes that we need to get through here. The first is whether or not we modify it, which I detect from members that the desire is to modify it as opposed to keep with what it is at the moment. And then as to the level at which we modify it, and it seems that the mood amongst members is to go for option 2, which is a 12.1% rise across the fare table based on the current CPI inflation figure, plus the estimated inflation rise since January 2018. So is it okay that do I need to take a vote on both or just one?
My feeling is together is fine.
Okay, all right.
Led by the monitoring officer.
Yeah, Chairman, I was going to say, if you're voting on an option, then it's implicit that you've agreed to vary. So
just to check. Okay, are there any? So we have a proposal from Councillor Rowe, I believe, which has been seconded by. Sorry, I didn't pick up who said. Councillor Taylor to increase it and to go by.
I just want to clarify that usually the trade will request that we review the taxi fares. So that's why it has been left for such a long time, because we've just been waiting for them to ask us, basically, and that's what triggers it usually. But I'm happy for it to be written in that we will review it in 2 years' time. I think that's a sensible thing to do going forward.
Can I just get an indicative idea from members that if sort of within that vote proviso that this is reviewed once every 2 years seems about right? Okay, as people seem to be nodding. Okay, right. So have you got that, Miss Young? Lovely. Okay. Is there anybody else Councillor Holloway?
Just one quick point, Chairman. Looking at the trade proposal, I'm sure we can't do anything on this occasion, but we might in the future look at bringing up the charge for an 8-seater, perhaps to the same level as a Sunday charge for an ordinary taxi. It seems a bit odd that one could book an 8-seater on a Sunday and save money.
Sorry, do you want that included in these proposals, or?
I think it would be good if we consider it, perhaps, as one of the considerations for the future.
Okay. Yeah. Councillor Spurden?
Yeah. Apologies if I've missed this, but if we do make the agreement, when will that take effect? When will the agreement take effect?
I could defer to Mr. Staples again.
It would come into effect if we didn't receive any adverse comments to the consultation. The consultation would be 2 weeks. That would be, we have the advert drafted and ready to go out in the next available newspaper that we can get it into. The 14 days start from the point it goes in the newspaper. And if no adverse comments were received in the 2 weeks, then it would come into effect 1 month post that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hodgson again.
Thank you, sorry. Yeah, just regarding 3.2 on page 29, I just wanted to clarify whether we're actually in this vote including the extra 10p allowance on the rise and fall of fuel prices, or are we taking that as a separate vote?
I suspect it's in the same vote, isn't it? So if I could go on, Mr. Staples.
So the proposal, the three proposals that Tara and myself worked up include the 10p fuel price accumulator as well. Basically, that would be inclusive of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think there appears to be a bit of consensus here. The motion has been, or the recommendation has been proposed and seconded. There's only one other thing that I would like to add, and that is that I do think that the committee should both note and indeed thank the Totnes taxis for taking the time to make proper representations. That they've gone about that quite properly. So I do think we need to note that in the recommendation. Mr. Fairbairn.
Chairman, are your proposer and seconder happy to include that in their proposal and second?
I shall ask are the proposer and seconder happy to include that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, they are. Okay, splendid. So if there is nothing else, I'm happy to go to the vote on this.
Yeah, but it's not possible to put up the screen what we're actually voting for, is it?
You could do, but it may take a couple of minutes. I
don't know what members think.
Would members like the full recommendation put up on the screen and with wording beforehand, or are they happy to go with what we've discussed?
I think it's fairly straightforward,
okay.
Chairman. To be honest,
okay,
we
that's
just
fine.
got a fair rise
In which case, we will go to the vote, which has been proposed by Councillor Rowe and seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour, please. Keep your hands up for just. I think that's unanimous. Lovely. Thank you very much. And I believe that is the end of the agenda. nothing else to cover. So I shall thank you all very much for your attending. Thank you to the officers for their time, and we can go to lunch.